The jungle was silent, far too silent. The kind of silence that presses down on your chest, making it hard to breathe. Beneath the thick canopy of palm and banyan trees, Japanese soldiers crouched inside their steel bunkers, structures they believed were impenetrable. These bunkers, made of reinforced steel, buried deep in the volcanic rock of Pacific Islands, had withstood artillery fire, mortar rounds, and countless bombing runs. They were supposed to be fortresses, safe havens in the heart of chaos. But on this day, something was different. A sound began to rise, faint at first, like the growl of an approaching storm. The men in the bunkers shifted nervously. They knew that sound, the deep, rumbling roar that came not from the sea, but from the skies. Some called it the whistling death. Others called it the bird of fire. To the Americans, it was the F4U Corsair, an aircraft with wings that seemed to bend like a gull, and an engine so powerful that its very presence struck fear into those below. The sound grew louder, closer, and suddenly, the jungle shook. The Corsairs appeared in the sky in tight formation, dark blue shapes diving like predators. Their engines screamed, and before the Japanese could even process what was happening, the first bombs were away. But these weren't ordinary bombs. These weren't meant to simply crack steel or blast through concrete. No, these were napalm canisters, tanks of sticky, burning fuel designed to do something far worse than explode. They were designed to burn. The canisters burst open above the bunkers, splattering fire across the steel structures. The flames didn't flicker like normal fire. They clung, crawled, and devoured everything in their path. The steel glowed red-hot within minutes, turning bunkers into ovens. Soldiers inside screamed, clawing at the air vents, pounding on the walls, desperate to escape. But there was no escape. The very protection they had trusted now became their prison. From above, American pilots watched the fire spread. The jungle itself caught fire, trees exploding into pillars of flame. The smell of burning fuel and scorched earth filled the air. It was more than a weapon, it was psychological warfare. Japanese soldiers who had once boasted that steel cannot burn now faced a terrifying truth. Steel might not burn, but the men inside surely would. The Corsair had become more than just a plane. It was a nightmare. This was not just another airstrike. This was a turning point in the Pacific War. For years, Japanese soldiers had hidden behind steel fortifications, dug deep into mountainsides, relying on their bunkers to protect them from American might. But now, with napalm strapped under the wings of Corsairs, those fortifications became death traps. The Americans had found the perfect predator. The Corsair was fast, faster than almost anything Japan could put into the sky. It could dive low, strike hard, and pull away before anti-aircraft fire could find its mark. Its 6.50 caliber machine guns could shred supply convoys. And now, with napalm, it could burn through what the Japanese thought was indestructible. On the ground, chaos reigned. Japanese commanders screamed orders, trying to rally their men, but the heat was unbearable. Ammunition stores inside bunkers began to cook off, exploding in rapid succession. Grenades popped like fireworks, and machine gun nests fell silent one by one. What had once been symbols of Japanese strength became fiery tombs. And yet, this was just the beginning. Because napalm wasn't just fire, it was terror. It was designed not only to kill but to destroy morale, to make even the bravest soldier doubt his safety. Imagine being trapped inside steel walls as fire seeps in, as oxygen disappears, as the very air turns to poison. Imagine hearing the screams of comrades echo through smoke-filled chambers. That's what Japanese troops endured on those islands. And high above it all, the Corsair pilots circled, watching their mission unfold. They knew this was working. They knew the Japanese had no answer for it. The bunkers, once the cornerstone of Japan's Pacific defense, were no longer safe. And as the camera of history zooms out, you begin to see the bigger picture. This wasn't just an air raid. This was America rewriting the rules of war. Every strike meant fewer Japanese reinforcements, fewer strongholds, fewer places to hide. Every bunker burned meant another island wrestled from Japan's grip. The Pacific was changing, and the Japanese, they were furious. Their steel, their pride, their fortresses, all of it was melting in the face of American innovation. But before we go further, let me pause here. Because if you've felt the tension in this story so far, If you can imagine the roar of the Corsair engines and the blinding fire raining down on those bunkers, then you're right here in the middle of it. And if you want to keep uncovering these untold stories of World War II, the moments that shook empires and changed the course of history, then do one thing right now. Hit that like button. Drop a comment telling me what you think about the Corsair's terrifying power. And make sure to subscribe, because what comes next in this story will leave you stunned. This is only the beginning of how Napalm and the Corsair shattered Japan's defenses, and the worst is yet to come. The first wave of napalm had already transformed the jungle into an inferno. But as the Corsairs banked around for another pass, the true scale of devastation became clear. From above, the once green canopy of the island now glowed with angry shades of orange and black, fire rolling across the ground like liquid death. The smell of burning fuel, steel, and human flesh rose into the sky. It was war at its most primal, man against machine, fire against fortitude. Inside one of the bunkers, Sergeant Nakamura pressed his face against the steel wall, sweat dripping in streams. The air was thick, unbreathable, each gasp bringing more smoke into his lungs. The heat was unbearable, like standing in the heart of a furnace. Around him, men coughed, cried out, and some prayed. For months, they had believed these steel bunkers were indestructible, a gift from their empire, proof of Japanese ingenuity. But now those same walls that once protected them felt like a coffin sealing shut. A soldier screamed as molten steel began to drip from the ceiling. Another tried to force open the heavy hatch, only to find it jammed, warped by the heat outside. The napalm had turned the bunkers into traps, and the men inside knew it. Above, the Corsairs came again. Their gull wings caught the light of the fires below, reflecting like blades against the sky. One by one, the pilots released their deadly cargo, more canisters of napalm tumbling toward the island. They burst open on impact, spreading burning gel across trenches, camouflaged nests, and the entrances of bunkers. The fire clung to everything. Water could not put it out. Dirt could not smother it. Once the flames took hold, they burned until nothing was left but ash and twisted metal. For the Japanese defenders, it was more than just physical destruction, it was psychological torment. They were soldiers trained to die for their emperor, men who would charge tanks with bayonets if ordered. But this was different. You could fight a man. You could fight a machine. But how do you fight fire that sticks to your skin, that crawls into your lungs, that eats you alive? One officer, Captain Hirose, staggered out of a burning bunker, his uniform scorched, his face blackened with soot. He screamed for his men to follow him, to regroup, to mount a defense. But as he stumbled into the open, another Corsair swooped down. The roar of its engine was deafening, the 6.50 caliber machine guns opening fire. Tracers ripped through the smoke, cutting him down before he could even raise his pistol. His body fell into the flames, swallowed instantly. The Japanese anti-aircraft crews tried desperately to fight back. Old machine guns rattled, their barrels glowing red as they spat bullets into the sky. But the Corsairs were too fast, too agile. They dived low, sprayed the gun nests with fire, and pulled up before the defenders could adjust their aim. The gunners were brave, suicidally brave, but bravery meant little against firepower like this. On the American side, the pilots communicated calmly over their radios. Target Alpha destroyed. Moving to Beta. Copy that. Napalm release successful. Keep it tight. Watch for crossfire. For them, this was another mission. But even seasoned pilots couldn't ignore what they were seeing below. The fire spread faster than they'd expected, leaping from bunker to bunker, trench to trench. Explosions dotted the island as ammunition stores ignited. The once proud Japanese stronghold was collapsing in real time. One pilot, Lieutenant Mark Harris, banked his Corsair hard to the left, glancing down at the devastation. He could see tiny figures running, some trying to flee, some desperately firing rifles into the sky as if bullets could stop fire. He swallowed hard. War had no mercy. Command was right. Harris muttered into his mic, "Napalm works." Back on the ground, Sergeant Nakamura finally forced the bunker's rear hatch open with the help of two surviving soldiers. But the sight that greeted them outside was worse than anything inside. The jungle was gone, replaced by a hellscape of flames and ash. Bodies lay scattered, some charred beyond recognition. Steel bunkers glowed like lanterns, their edges warped and twisted. He covered his mouth with his sleeve and tried to lead his men toward what little cover remained. But the sound returned, the roar of engines above. Looking up, Nakamura saw another wave of Corsairs descending, their wings glinting in the firelight. "Run," he shouted. But where could they run? The island was burning in every direction. The Corsairs released another wave of napalm, and the fire fell like rain. Nakamura threw himself into a shallow ditch as the flames washed over the earth, clinging to everything they touched. His ears rang with the screams of his comrades, the crack of gunfire, the endless roar of fire. Hours passed like this. Wave after wave of Corsairs tore across the sky, each pass leaving more destruction. The Japanese garrison, once proud and defiant, was reduced to scattered survivors hiding among burning ruins. Commanders dead, communications destroyed, morale shattered. By nightfall, the island glowed like a torch in the middle of the Pacific. Smoke rose in thick black columns, visible for miles. American ships offshore could see the fire raging, the glow lighting up the horizon. For them, it was a sign of victory. For the Japanese, it was the beginning of despair. In the steel bunkers that had not completely collapsed, men suffocated slowly, the air too thick to breathe. Outside, those who survived the flames lay wounded, their uniforms burned into their skin. Some crawled aimlessly, begging for water, for air, for mercy that would never come. The Corsair had changed everything. The Japanese knew the Americans had powerful weapons. They had seen bombs, artillery, even flamethrowers. But napalm was different. It was a weapon that didn't just kill. It consumed. It lingered. It erased. By the end of that day, thousands of Japanese soldiers were gone, burned alive, trapped in their steel shelters, or cut down as they tried to escape. And those who survived carried something even worse than wounds, fear. Because now they knew. No matter how strong their steel, no matter how deep their bunkers, no matter how loyal their hearts, there was no protection from the fire that rained from the wings of the Corsair. And this was only the second day of the campaign. The Americans had proven their point. The Japanese weren't just losing ground. They were losing hope. The fires burned for days. Even after the Corsairs had returned to their carriers and the skies grew silent, the island smoldered like a dying volcano. Black smoke rose into the heavens, a grim signal of what had transpired. From a distance, American ships could still see the flames flickering at night, like a warning beacon to any who thought the Japanese defenses were unbreakable. But on the ground, for the few who had survived, it was a nightmare that refused to end. Sergeant Nakamura crawled from the ditch he had thrown himself into hours earlier. His uniform was burned, his left hand useless from where fire had melted cloth to skin. Around him, the world was unrecognizable. What had once been a proud fortress, steel bunkers hidden beneath jungle canopies, trenches laced with barbed wire, ammunition stores stacked with precision, was nothing more than twisted wreckage. Bunkers looked like melted cages. Trenches were filled with charred remains. And the jungle was gone, replaced by blackened stumps and a ground that cracked underfoot like burnt clay. He staggered forward, past comrades who no longer moved. Some had been incinerated beyond recognition, their forms reduced to black shadows against glowing steel. Others lay in agonized silence, still alive but broken, their eyes glazed over with the knowledge that there was no rescue coming. For the Japanese, honor had always been the ultimate shield. To die for the emperor was glorious. To fight until the last breath was expected. But now, even that shield felt hollow. How do you die with honor when you don't even have the chance to fight back? When your steel fortress turns into your tomb, when fire eats away at everything you've built. By dawn, the surviving officers gathered what remained of their men, perhaps 100 soldiers out of the thousands who had once garrisoned the island. Their commander, a stern major named Takeda, stood before them, his face blackened with soot, his uniform torn. He raised his sword high, though his hand shook as he did so. "We will rebuild," he declared hoarsely. "The Americans will not have the last word here. We will fight until this island is bathed in our blood if we must." The men raised their voices weakly in reply, but their eyes betrayed them. There was no fire left, only fear. The Corsairs had done more than destroy steel and flesh. They had destroyed belief. Far above the ruined island, the American fleet celebrated. Reports filtered in quickly, The napalm strike had succeeded beyond expectations. The Japanese bunkers, once thought invulnerable to bombing and artillery, had been reduced to molten graves. Thousands of enemy soldiers were confirmed dead, their defenses annihilated in a single afternoon. On the deck of his carrier, Lieutenant Mark Harris removed his helmet, sweat pouring down his face despite the cool ocean air. He leaned against the railing, staring toward the smoke in the distance. For his fellow pilots, there was pride, even excitement. The Corsair had once again proven its worth, and napalm had become the weapon of fear. But Harris couldn't shake what he had seen. Tiny figures running, burning, falling. The sound of their screams had somehow pierced the roar of his engine. He lit a cigarette with trembling fingers, whispering to himself, "This is the future of war. Fire instead of bullets." And he was right. News of the raid spread quickly, not just across the American fleet, but across the Pacific. On every island where Japanese forces dug in, whispers began to circulate. "The fire weapon is coming," soldiers muttered. "Even steel cannot protect us." For an army that thrived on discipline, certainty, and the illusion of invincibility, such whispers were poison. In Tokyo, the news was received with outrage. Japanese high command was furious, not only at the losses but at the humiliation. Steel bunkers had been their pride, a symbol of resilience. Now, they had been turned into ovens by a single innovation. The Imperial Navy swore vengeance. Plans were drawn for new strategies, new weapons, desperate measures to counter the fire from the sky. But in their hearts, many officers knew the truth. America's industrial machine was creating tools the Japanese could not match. The Corsair had been nicknamed Whistling Death by the Japanese. Now, it had earned a darker title, the Bringer of Fire. On the island, the few survivors dug shallow graves for their comrades. They worked in silence, the only sound the crackle of smoldering ruins. Sergeant Nakamura, his left hand wrapped in dirty bandages, placed a helmet over one grave, marking it for a friend who had burned alive inside a bunker. His face was blank. He could not cry. He could not rage. The fire had taken even that from him. As night fell, he looked toward the horizon, where the glow of American ships lit the waters. He knew they would return, with more fire, more bombs, more steel birds screaming overhead, and he knew there was no stopping them. The Japanese Empire had built its war on the strength of its soldiers' spirit, on their ability to endure suffering, to turn pain into pride. But now, for the first time, that spirit wavered. The Corsairs had shown them a weapon they could not endure, a weapon that clung to their bodies, devoured their shelters, and erased their courage. For America, it was more than a tactical victory. It was proof that innovation could shatter even the fiercest of enemies. The Pacific War was far from over, but on that island, in those bunkers, the tide had shifted. The Corsair had not just burned steel. It had burned into the Japanese psyche. And from that day forward, wherever the roar of its engine was heard, Japanese soldiers trembled, because they knew the fire was coming.